Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So glad you're joining us today. Okay, we are diving right into a topic that is quietly but massively reshaping the very foundation of how we consume information. We're talking about the European Union's monumental AI Act, but we're going to zero in on one very specific and honestly fascinating piece of it: how the EU is stepping in to regulate AI transparency, specifically when it comes to the news media. Ultimately, this is all about knowing what's real, what's synthetic, and who is really pulling the strings behind the screen. So, I want you to picture this. It's the core question we're tackling today. Will you actually know if AI wrote your news? Like, when you're scrolling through your feed over your morning coffee, reading about some upcoming election or a big economic policy shift, how confident are you that a human being actually wrote those words? Because as artificial intelligence becomes seamlessly integrated into newsrooms across the world, this question, it's not theoretical anymore. It is our daily reality. And the European Union has decided that you, as a consumer, absolutely have a right to know the answer. And guess what? They have put a literal ticking clock on this. The EU's sweeping AI transparency rules officially go into effect on August 2nd, 2026. Now sure, some legacy generative AI systems have a brief grace period until December of that year just to get their technical watermarks in order, but for most businesses and newsrooms out there, August 2026 is the hard deadline. We are entirely in the preparation phase right now, and the clock is ticking for publishers across the continent. Just to give you a sense of the sheer scale of this legislation, a staggering 33% of respondents in a recent EU AI Act compliance checker found that transparency obligations are actually their second most common compliance trigger, right? That affects roughly 1/3 of all the organizations polled. Basically, if an organization generates content with AI, they are very likely caught in this net. It's a massive shift in corporate and journalistic compliance. So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the AI transparency era. Then, the 4 rules of Article 50. After that, providers versus deployers. Then we'll tackle the AI journalism question, look at to label or not, and finally wrap up with preparing for August 2026. All right, part 1, the AI transparency era, and how we are moving way beyond just high-risk AI. Okay, so the absolutely crucial point here is understanding Article 50 of the EU AI Act. You know how most of the headlines you see about the AI Act usually focus on high-risk systems? You know, things like medical AI or automated hiring tools that require strict conformity assessments. Well, Article 50 is totally different. It casts a much wider net. It introduces transparency obligations that apply to literally all AI systems in specific situations, even open source ones. If you use a standard generative AI tool to write an article or whip up a graphic, Article 50 probably applies to you, regardless of whether that tool is considered high risk. Moving right along to part 2, the 4 rules of Article 50. Let's unpack what these transparency obligations actually look like. Article 50 basically boils down to 4 distinct, everyday encounters you might have with AI. First up, interaction. If you're talking to a customer service chatbot, the system has to inform you it's an AI. Pretty straightforward. Second, synthetic content. AI-generated images or text must have machine-readable watermarks embedded in them. Third, emotion and biometrics. If an AI is analyzing your stress levels or sentiment, yeah, you absolutely must be told. And fourth, deepfakes and news. If AI is used to manipulate video or generate text to inform the public on matters of public interest, its artificial origin has to be fully disclosed. Which brings us to Section 3, providers versus deployers. Essentially, who is actually responsible for what? Now, there is a really clear divide here, and it's a distinction that trips a lot of people up. On one side, we have providers. These are the tech giants, the folks actually building the generative AI systems. Under Article 50.2, their job is highly technical. They have to embed those machine-readable watermarks into the outputs so detection tools can spot them. But on the other side, we have deployers. These are the organizations, like a newspaper or a media outlet, that are using that AI under their own authority. Under Article 50.4, the deployer is the one who bears the burden of publicly disclosing to the reader that the text they're looking at was generated by AI. So to sum it up, the builder watermarks it, but the user discloses it. All right, part 4, the AI journalism question. How does Article 50.4 hit the newsroom? To really get this, we have to look at an ongoing, multi-layered study by the Media and Journalism Research Center, or MJRC. Because let's be real, just looking at a news website doesn't actually tell you how an article was made. So the MJRC is investigating this using 3 components. Component A maps out the local legal landscape in each country. Component B is a public-facing audit. Basically, what does the newsroom claim their AI policy is? And component C, that involves direct surveys and interviews to find out what they actually do internally before hitting publish. They are testing this out first in Hungary, Romania, and Germany to see exactly where public transparency and internal practices diverge. And the MJRC arrived at a really fascinating conclusion here. They said the label is the last question, not the first. I love this framing. The EU AI Act doesn't just ban newsrooms from using AI, and it certainly doesn't mandate that everything an AI even slightly touches gets a giant warning sticker slapped on it. It actually ties the duty to disclose directly to how a newsroom organizes its own editorial oversight. Which leads perfectly into Section 5, to label or not. Let's talk about the editorial exception. Okay, so imagine a 3-stage decision tree that every single European newsroom is soon going to have to navigate. Step 1. Did an AI actually generate or manipulate this text? If a human journalist just wrote it unaided, you stop right there. No label needed. But if yes, you move to step 2. Is it about a matter of public interest, politics, health, justice? If yes, you move to step 3, which is the most critical step. Did this text undergo real human review? Did someone have the authority to reject it? And does a specific person or organization hold legal editorial responsibility for it? If the answer to step 3 is yes, boom. The newsroom qualifies for the editorial exception, and no AI disclosure is required. The law literally rewards human oversight. Now, to properly understand the scope of the MJRC's research into this, we have to recognize a few legal realities. First, the law does not actually force a newsroom to publish its AI policy. Second, if an article doesn't have an AI label, it might just be human written, or it might simply fall under that editorial exception we just went through. Conversely, if a newsroom does decide to use a visible AI label, it's not some admission of wrongdoing. They might just be choosing to be extra transparent with their audience. And crucially, get this, researchers aren't using AI detection tools to guess if text is synthetic because, honestly, those tools are notoriously unreliable. They are looking strictly at the organizational processes. All right, our final section, preparing for August 2026. What exactly happens next? Here is the timeline every publisher and AI provider is watching right now. Back in February 2025, the absolute prohibitions on unacceptable AI practices went into effect. But looking ahead, June 2026 is going to be incredibly important. That's when the EU's Code of Practice on AI-generated content is expected to be finalized. This code is actively developing a standardized EU label for content. Think like a visual AI badge or Key Eye in German. And while it's voluntary, this code is going to become the practical benchmark for compliance. And then, the main event, August 2nd, 2026, when the Article 50 transparency obligations officially become law for providers and deployers alike. I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to chew on today. How visible are your favorite newsroom's editorial processes? Because as we've learned, the EU AI Act makes transparency less about the specific algorithms a publisher uses and entirely about the human editorial responsibility backing it up. Will this new burden of proof change how much you trust your daily news? It is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch newsrooms adapt to this over the coming months. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep asking questions about the information you consume. See you next time.